Hello everybody. My name is Enrique, as you probably know me from this channel, and I have the honor to have host with us Rebecca Kase. She's from the state of Washington in the west coast of the United States, where it's very early in the morning. Here we in Barcelona, we are around 6 p.m. And she's a licensed therapist, an author, a yoga instructor, and many other things that we will get to know about with her as we talk about her book that is now available in Spanish, Polyvagal EMDR or EMDR Polyvagal. And we are going to also have a webinar with Rebecca and an in-person course in Barcelona during this year, hopefully. If all aligns and you feel connected, please feel free to join us. So welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I found your work with your book, Polyvagal EMDR or EMDR Polyvagal, as we say it in Spanish. What's the actual title in English?
Polyvagal informed EMDR.
Polyvagal Informed EMDR. I think in Spanish it
Mhm.
was translated as MDR Polyvagal. By
Okay.
the publisher in Spain is Desclé. And so I want to inquire because EMDR and polyvagal are so powerful by themselves, and what brought you to bring them together? What was and where did that happen inside of you? Because I'm sure something in your trajectory brought you there, but I just want to leave that open for you to discuss.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was trained in EMDR in 2006 and very passionate about that model and how powerful it can be for people's healing. And I always felt that EMDR was missing some warmth and a focus on the relationship. And it can feel very descriptive and prescriptive. Do this and this and this and this and this. And we know that our neurobiology is much more flexible and fluid than that. And so when I learned polyvagal theory, I felt this light bulb go off in my brain that said, this is the missing half of EMDR. Because polyvagal theory has such an emphasis on the social engagement system, on how we form connection and relationship, and how incredibly medicinal relationships are for healing and necessary for healing. And EMDR was really missing that focus on the relationship and how do you really attend to the relationship while you're desensitizing a target. So that was really valuable to me. And then the other piece that I find so enriching with polyvagal theory for the EMDR model is that it really puts our focus on the neurophysiological processes at play. So it helps us understand what is phase 3 doing and why is that important? And how do we make sense of the negative cognition from the lens of how the memory is stored in the neurobiology of our nervous system? How do we understand what a SUDS really is? What is actually happening when we desensitize a target to the point of adaptive resolution? So I feel that when we embrace polyvagal theory, it makes us more well-rounded clinicians because we're really understanding what the model is achieving in the nervous system. And when we can better understand what's happening, we can be better aligned and more astute with our clinical interventions. And of course, be much more relationship focused in the process.
I really appreciated when I was looking through your book how thorough you wrote it, how descriptive and how backed all your claims were. So I really appreciated that rigor that you applied to yourself when writing the book. And I could
Oh,
and I
thank you.
could also say your enthusiasm and your point in emphasizing safety for clients and safety for the therapist. Could you speak about your experience with it?
Yes, so in the book, I outline a modified, I guess, name for phase one. Instead of history taking and treatment planning, my name for phase one is safety and case conceptualization, because safety is at the root of everything, of all healing. We have to feel safe to truly heal. And polyvagal theory really emphasizes, Porges says, that safety is the intervention. Safety is the intervention, not how you read phase three, not what you do in phase four, but really focusing on safety. And so safety is a really in-depth concept. It's not just, well, yes, I'm safe. I'm not yelling at my client and I'm not mean and I'm not throwing objects at them, right? But safety, what does that really mean for our nervous system? And how does safety help us be vulnerable? Because when we can be vulnerable with our therapist as we're healing from adverse experiences and trauma, that is real where the real magic happens, in my opinion. And so to create safety, we have to check ourselves. We have to be really mindful of how we're showing up to the space, how we're offering cues of safety to our clients, how those might be perceived by our client. And really, we have to pay so close attention to how we're taking care of our nervous system outside of sessions. Because if we're not taking care of our nervous system and we're showing up consistently in a dysregulated state, we simply can't be a safe container for our clients to really lean into the work. And I feel that that is not only a missing piece in the EMDR model, but something that's really missing in the field of us talking about why self-care is an ethical imperative. Because when we take care of our nervous system, we're going to be better with our clients.
Yes, and taking care of our nervous system means, right, having connections that regulate us.
Yes, having connections that regulate us, having skills and tools to be able to not only regulate, because regulation feels like a word that gets thrown around a lot these days of, the goal is to be regulated. And you're never going to be regulated all the time as a human being. We're all living on this planet.
Yeah.
Life is a dysregulating experience. But how can we better understand ourselves, our psyche, our neurobiology, things that feel triggering or activating to us, how our past is informing our present, so that in those moments of extreme dysregulation, we don't feel like life is happening to us. We still have some capacity to trust the experience and to have some efficacy over our inner world. Because when our inner world feels out of control, we feel out of control and life gets really, really scary. So we're all going to have times of dysregulation, but it's really about how do we build a more resilient nervous system? And that comes from really understanding ourselves. And self-care is about having those co-regulating moments, right? So I feel very regulated sitting with you right now, from the cues of safety that you share with me, which is the tone of your voice and your facial expressions. And, we've met before, and that was a very pleasant interaction for my nervous system. So I feel very safe here, right? And if I didn't feel safe here, I wouldn't be able to show up in the same way. But it's also about, how do you take care of your nervous system on a day-to-day basis? It's not all about bubble baths and going on a vacation. That's all lovely, but sometimes we have to do things that aren't fun. Like I do cold water therapy every day in the shower, and I never really want to do it, but I know it's so good for me. So it's part of how I take care of my nervous system so I can show up here the way I want to show up.
That's great, Rebecca. And I'm wondering, for many of our colleagues who are EMDR practitioners, how do you teach them polyvagal for EMDR practitioners? How do you teach them to attune to the physiology? How do you go about that part?
Yeah, so whether that's about how do you attune to your own physiology or your clients, the number one guiding rule is to just stay curious. curiosity is the most important piece for us to better understand ourselves and to understand our clients. Because when we can stay curious, when we notice maybe a moment for ourselves of, oh, I'm feeling quite anxious right now. Let me stay curious. What might be happening here? Right? We allow ourselves to look to our physical markers and what's happening in our head and what's happening with our emotions. You know, if we're noticing we're having cravings or urges or there's desires that are showing up, you know, I feel anxious and I want to eat a whole bunch of cookies. And, you know, a whole bottle of wine sounds really good right now. What might be going on? How do I stay curious about it? Then we stay out of this place of judging ourselves. And when we judge ourselves, we're really disaligning from our neurobiology, because your nervous system is full of information. It's data points. And so the same is true when we work with our clients of, gosh, I wonder what might be happening in this person's nervous system right now. Sometimes it feels very clear, you know, our client is having a flashback. We understand something triggered them. This is, you know, a hallmark symptom of PTSD. But we all have some interesting client presentations where we're just, what might this be about? And if we don't stay curious, we can quickly go to, well, I know what the answer is, and this is what we do to fix it. Or I don't know what the answer is, so I'm a terrible therapist. I don't know what I'm doing, right? But if we can just stay curious, we can better align with what is happening in the brain and the body and the heart without judgment.
Great. So in a typical polyvagal informed EMDR session, what do you do differently that you didn't do before?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Just a little tip, because then we will go further in the webinar that you will teach for us.
Yeah.
Maybe something you like to share for the people who may watch this interview.
Yeah, so in polyvagal informed EMDR, something that I do in that space that I wasn't necessarily taught to do in EMDR training otherwise was to have a constant point of focus on the relationship, on the status of the relationship, how we're doing every minute of the session. If it feels like there's a rupture, how do I lean into that with curiosity? How do I track how my client is responding to my cues of presence, to my therapeutic attunement? And that becomes not only a way for me to gauge when we're ready to dive into processing targets, but it's also something for me to track in reevaluation as well. And really understanding that the therapeutic relationship is the vessel, is the container through which all healing occurs.
Great, great. So thank you very much for this. It really makes me want to read more of the book that you wrote and attend the webinar that you will teach, because I'm sure you will be able to help many people, professionals like you and me, who want to do this integration, because it seems to me that you actually took every phase of EMDR and were very careful to bring the core principles of polyvagal theory to them. Is that right? Or it's just my
Yes.
impression?
Yes, absolutely. So every phase of EMDR, I've outlined the opportunities to integrate polyvagal theory through whether it's, you know, how you view and understand and case conceptualize differently, to actual applied interventions, to how do you track readiness in phase 2, and even how do we reevaluate in phase 8.
Wow. Could you give an example, just a small case, like a narrative of a small case where you did this, just to illustrate this point, just some part or some spaces, if that's okay with you, if something comes to
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the sections of the book and of my integrated model that I feel is perhaps most impactful and helpful to therapists is in phase 2 and the outline of what I call the preparation hierarchy. And so the preparation hierarchy is a method for clinicians to really be able to assess readiness. So I'm an EMDR trainer, and you know, I've been practicing again since 2006, and I've found that such a common point of fear and worry and hesitation and anxiety for clinicians is my client ready to process memories? And there's this fear that if I dive into working on memories before they're ready, I'm going to do harm. I'm going to make it worse. And I too have sat with that, because historically, all I've ever seen on readiness is kind of a checklist. Did you explain EMDR? Did you go over bilateral stimulation?
Yeah.
Did you teach safe, calm place? But none of that actually tells you, are they ready? Those are just checklists, right? So in my study of polyvagal theory, I took one of the many lectures I've taken with Stephen Porges. He talked about what's called neural exercises. And neural exercises are exercises, which may be clinical intervention, or me even doing cold water therapy in my shower in the morning is a neural exercise. It's a way to exercise our nervous system. And there are specific objectives that we need to be able to achieve with our neurobiology to take on kind of the heavy lift of processing targets. And so the preparation hierarchy starts with safe enough to feel. That is the foundation of everything. Does your client have enough safety in their life, in the relationship, in their body to feel feelings and sensations? The next is the ability to notice and name. Can they notice what's happening inside and put some language on it? Next comes feel and flex. So can I feel distress? Can I tolerate feelings, even positive affects? And do I have some skills to work with that? When I feel so dysregulated, or when I feel scared or overwhelmed, do I feel like things are just out of control, or do I have something to pull in to change my experience and have some sense of control? And then the outcome of all of it is the ability to trust the process. So in my book, I really dive into each of those domains and some of the things we might utilize in therapy that therapists are already doing to really help build resiliency. So how this has helped me is I too felt, until I kind of developed this model, felt confused of, is my client ready? Because we never want to go so slow that we're not getting into reprocessing when our client could tolerate it. I don't want to drag this out for you, right? Let's get in there and reprocess those memories. But also, I don't want to go so fast that it overwhelms you. And then they say, never mind, I don't want to do EMDR, or they decide therapy isn't for them. So we get caught in this state of, I don't want to go too slow, but I don't want to go too fast. And so when I outlined the hierarchy, I remember a client that I really applied it to, who I was feeling a little nervous about reprocessing with. And she had just a very, very significant trauma history. She had childhood abuse, physical and sexual abuse. She had been in multiple violent relationships as an adult, and she was also an Army veteran, so had been in combat as well. And she also had a lot of complex physical health conditions as an outcome of all of that trauma. So it was just a very complex case. And I wanted to be so mindful that I didn't go too fast, because not only could that make all of her symptoms worse, but it could also inflame her physical health conditions, right?
Exactly.
And so when I looked at the hierarchy said she's ready. She's safe enough to feel, she can notice a name, she can feel and flex, and there's so much trust between us. She really trusts me. And so I said, I'm going to trust what neurobiology says, and we're going to dive in and we're going to work on some targets. And the first target we started on was a target from childhood of sexual abuse. And I expected that target to take us multiple sessions, and it did not. It took maybe 20 minutes. And so it was just a moment of, oh my gosh, she was really ready. And I was looking at the wrong things. And she came back the next session. She said, oh my gosh, I feel so different about this target. This is amazing. And I mean, we dove into the other targets on that treatment plan, and she just blew through them with so much ease. And that was just a moment that I realized, wow, I've been taught to look at the wrong thing. I was focused on how heavy all of her trauma was and all of these symptoms, instead of, is her nervous system ready? It's just a game changer to use that model.
Yes, 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 yes. So you kind of brought in on the polyvagal way to really assess how you were with your client. And that also kind of created a buffer for your client to really speed up her healing in some way, or allow the healing to happen at the way it was supposed to be, probably, rather than.
Yes. Yeah, rather than delaying treatment when she was truly ready. And the other way I like to use that model, Enrique, is, sometimes your clients do have some skills established along that hierarchy. Maybe they're safe enough to feel and can notice a name, but they get really stuck in really big, overwhelming symptoms that, they have about this much bandwidth versus this much. And so it also helps you identify, when might I use a modified approach? So maybe my client can't tolerate a full float back starting with the past prong, but based on this model, you can identify, maybe we start with symptoms and I use EMD, and that will help get the nervous system even more capacity, even more resiliency. So we can use it to think about, how do I titrate the work instead of it being all or nothing? Do you reprocess or not? Well, maybe your client has some skills to tolerate it, but maybe they just can't go to the first, earliest, worst memory and
Of
tolerate
course.
the full protocol. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you so much. So I'm interested in asking you if you want to share more of your personal trajectory, because it seems you have gone through a lot of transformation yourself
Yeah.
throughout your life. Could you share something of
Yeah.
what
Yeah. I'm
made you
happy to share.
transform and what make you do what you're doing right now, with your
Yeah. Yeah.
business
Thank you.
and trainings and all that?
Yeah. So I do. I have a pretty complicated trauma history myself, and I have had PTSD. I don't have PTSD any longer, and used to have an anxiety disorder, and I've struggled with depression throughout my life, and I've had some really, really dark times. And, turned to various ways to try and cope, whether that was drugs or alcohol many years ago, really unhealthy relationships. And I really dove into the work and saved my life, essentially. If I hadn't done that work, I've done a lot of EMDR, I've done a lot of energy healing. I have taken a lot of courses that were not only, I want to learn this information, for example, Reiki, I'm trained in Reiki, but I really wanted to learn it also to save myself in a way. And so polyvagal theory has really helped me to understand myself, and it has helped me to unburden myself from some of the shame I carried from my past, of whether that was blaming myself for things that happened that truly weren't my fault or in my control, or judging myself or blaming myself for the ways that I used to cope. And so, my journey, yoga has been such a remarkable part of my journey. I stepped into my first yoga class when I was 15 years old. So that was a long time ago. At this point, I'm in my 40s. So that was a long time ago. And yoga has always been such an important part of my healing. And it is embodied in my clinical practice and the way I look at the world. And, it's something that I practice every single day. And I used to feel that I had to compartmentalize, that this is my history and this is my personal life and this is my professional life. And while I certainly don't go into my sessions with clients and say, here's my trauma history, right? That's not appropriate. But I have now learned, I would say in the last 5 years, I've really given myself the space and grace to use my history, my own lived experiences, as to see them as they were kind of college classrooms. They were a classroom that I was in at the time. They were such an important, pivotal part of my own learning for my own life, and to be more effective as a therapist. Because anyone can sit down and read a book, right? But to be able to really walk it and talk it I feel is a significant difference between I just know these things in my head and I have truly lived through this experience. And again, it's about we have to find that balance. I'm not showing up to my sessions disclosing all this with my clients, it's not a focus whatsoever. But I feel that if we as therapists can embrace our own trauma and our own adversity, because most of us are in this field because we have it, and something about it inspired us to go be the difference for others, I feel that it makes us much more wiser and compassionate beings in the work that we do. And that when you're involved in helping others healing, you're also healing yourself at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What would you say? So you feel you have been like reborn again? You found you shed an old identity and a new one came to you as a result of your personal healing process?
Hmm. I think that I have had various chapters in my life. And there are some chapters I look back on and they were really rough. You weren't sure if the hero or the main character was going to make it through to the next chapter. There are a couple chapters in my life that I look back and I'm just honestly really grateful that I'm still here. Um, and so I think of it all as transformation of a metaphor that I sometimes use is that when hardship happens to us, whether it be adverse experiences or trauma or pain and loss and grief, if we can learn to see it as compost,
Yeah.
it's manure.
Yeah.
And how do at first maybe you're like, I don't like this manure. It stinks. It's gross. It's terrible. Get it out of my backyard. I don't want to be anywhere near it. I don't want to touch it. But when we learn to see it as this is fertile soil that I can use to grow some beautiful flowers from. That's how I really look back on the chapters in my life. And I didn't used to look at them like that. I used to look at them as scary and shameful, and I'm so disappointed in myself. And now I see it as these were classrooms, these were times of learning, and I got a whole bunch of manure that I didn't ask for. But now I'm truly so grateful for all of it. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I'm grateful for it because it allowed me to discover a better version of myself. And I didn't know that she existed back then. And I'm so grateful for this person that I know today.
Mm.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. It's really felt when you share this about you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And I feel like this is really the journey of trauma healing, isn't it?
Yes.
If we believe this ourselves, if we believe, even if our clients don't, all of this stuff you're going through, my dear, is fertile soil for who you're yet to become. But if we can
Yeah.
hold that deep belief, that knowing, if we believe that 100%, even if we're not sure how that's going to happen, but we believe it to be truth, the energy that we infuse into our sessions by simply embodying that belief and being that bright light who knows that, all pain has the capacity to help us transform. No one transforms without a crisis or chaos or pain, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you make me think of a client that I was just working with a little before our conversation, and he touched on something that I also find relevant for this discussion, which is sometimes even in the moments when we give up and find the deepest darkness, and we think there is no more beyond that point,
Mm-hmm.
and that's like a place of surrendering. And
Mm-hmm.
even when you lost the belief that you can, even that you maybe fall into the compost yourself. And then will be a much deeper transformation, we release also that push that we put on ourselves to make it different than what it is. So I really appreciate what you're sharing because it fits in with the transformative experiences of both EMDR, as I also have experienced it, and the power of the nervous system to reboot itself with the anchoring and ventral,
Yeah.
and really the awakening of a deeper awareness, that you show very beautifully in your work and in everything that you're offering with people.
Well, thank you so much. There's a poem that's coming to my mind right now as we talk about this, and it's by Mary Oliver, and it's a very short poem. It's called Box of Darkness, and the poem is, I might not get it exactly right, but it says, someone I once loved gave me a box of darkness, and it took me some time to realize that this too was a gift.
Wow, exactly.
Mhm.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, that too, it's a gift. The box of darkness.
The box of darkness that you don't want, right? Because yeah, I don't want to get in this compost. I don't want to get in this box of manure and compost. But when you learn to see it as the way through is through, the way through is through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to round up, is there anything you would like to share about your experience of writing the book, or what has happened to you once you went through it, how and the road it showed you?
Yeah. Well, I will say that writing an academic book is a real roller coaster journey with your own neurobiology. It is a confusing experience because you are really pouring your heart and soul into something. And I've joked sometimes that when the book was about to come out, I felt so anxious because I felt like it's something really intimate in a way, right? It's something that I spent over a year putting together and thinking about and just put my heart and soul into. And it's kind of like you're showing everyone your underwear drawer and you're asking for them to comment. It just feels so personal. So, right? Because you've really put your heart and soul into this project and then you share it with the world and you know that people are going to criticize it or they might really enjoy it and take it to heart. So it was not a fully ventral experience to write it. There was lots of dorsal and sympathetic activation along the way. You have your imposter part pop up, certainly. And it's different writing an academic book versus the flip chart that I've written. And then also in May of 2025, I have a self-help book called The Polyvagal Solution. And that was a delight to write. But writing an academic book where it's going to be in the field of academia and you want to be taken serious. And so you want to make sure you have good citations and you're backing your claims and whatnot. It
Absolutely.
that was a box of compost itself that I got to journey through, and I really got cozy with my imposter part who said you don't know what you're doing, and I just had to tell her I don't know what I'm doing. I've never written a book before. You're right. So but I'm gonna do my best at it. I know EMDR and I know polyvagal theory, but I don't know what I'm doing writing an academic book, but now I do. So it was quite a journey, but on the other side, what I am so grateful that it has brought me is certainly more opportunities to support people, whether that's be clinicians supporting their, clients or people in the self-help world. I'm really excited about the polyvagal solution that is self-help oriented because I just feel I can help so many more people. But I am so, so deeply humbled and grateful by the connections it's brought me, like this one right here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, same
So
thing.
perhaps there's some wisdom in that when you lean into those vulnerable places and you are aware of how scary it is and how intimidating it is and all of that vulnerability. On the other side is some really beautiful things like new connections and new opportunities and making a difference in the world, which is really what's most important to me.
No, inspiring. Thank you. Last, in the 3 hour that you are gonna give for our Spanish speakers and also English speakers that may join, Will you talk about what would they see and learn in the 3 hour webinar that we have
Yeah.
scheduled?
Yeah, so our 3 hour webinar will be like a little appetizer to the full model. So we'll certainly review some of the core principles of polyvagal informed EMDR so you can start to wrap your minds around what it means to integrate this model into your 8 phases of EMDR practice. We'll certainly review the preparation hierarchy so that you don't feel so confused or anxious about whether or not your client might be ready to process targets. And we'll also dive into some specific interventions to support and readiness and to guide through reprocessing targets. So it'll just be kind of a skimming the surface, but clinicians will walk away with some concrete tools to be able to apply to their sessions right away.
Perfect, perfect. And how about the 10-hour workshop that we'll host in Barcelona with you?
Yeah, so that will be our deep dive. Oh my gosh, and we'll get to be together in person. So we'll really get to lean into the social engagement system and form connection and create a space where we all feel safe enough to be curious and to be vulnerable and to ask questions in a supportive space. So in our 10-hour course, we'll dive into all of the 8 phases with much more depth and breadth. You'll learn how to integrate polyvagal theory throughout every phase of EMDR. You'll learn some specific interventions along with interweaves in phase 4. You'll learn one of my favorite techniques for phase 7 and closure, and we'll reframe what we're really tracking in phase 8 reevaluation to know is this working or do I need to make some modifications? We'll do a lot of experiential practice as well. So you'll get to actually receive some of the interventions and not just be lectured at and just look at slides. I try and create a really dynamic experience where we laugh and we have fun and we're curious and we get to actually walk out feeling like we received some of the healing as well.
Exactly. Thank you so much. So I look forward to having you with us for the webinar, for the course, and to ongoing collaboration.
Absolutely. I'm so thrilled. Thank you so much for this
Thank,
connection.
thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye bye.